Welcome to the Finding Families podcast, where each episode we explore different cases from our files. We identify and bring together family members with those they may never have known. Mostly, we look for unknown birth fathers, where the magic of DNA brings much needed answers to lifelong searchers. I am Louise Baldock, and this episode I'll be talking to Nick about his search.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me on the podcast, and I'm extremely grateful, Louise, for your help in locating my family in America, because I got incorrect information from my mother. She gave me the wrong name, and all the details she gave me were wrong, apart from the fact that he worked for Nabisco. So I was adopted in 1965. I was born in December 64, and my mother was from a very strict family. I only found this out after 2000 when I actually met my mum. But my mother was from a very strict family, and she didn't tell them that she was pregnant. She was a Boots Number 7 cosmetics rep.
Wow.
And she would travel around England doing makeovers. She set up a little booth in Boots stores and do a makeover using Boots Number 7 cosmetics and then sell the ladies' cosmetics.
Glorious.
Exactly. So she had a legitimate reason not to go home. So she hid out in Harrogate. That's rather good, isn't it?
Yeah, like Agatha Christie. She hid out in Harrogate.
Oh, she did, didn't she? Yeah, it's really funny because later on, my adopted parents, like on my mum and dad, we used to do the Harrogate spring and autumn flower shows. My dad was a nurseryman, so we used to do flower shows in there. And I used to go to Harrogate quite regularly. So I actually love the town's lovely, isn't it? It's a very pretty town. She worked for as long as she could. She gave birth to me in Harrogate and placed me with a childminder because she wanted to carry on being a Boots Number 7 cosmetics rep. So she was with me for 10 days, apparently, in the hospital, which was apparently extended time. And then she put me with a childminder and she went off round the UK doing her Boots Number 7 cosmetics representing and makeovering. And after about 3 months, she got a telephone call from social services saying, please, would you urgently come back and rescue Nicholas? And she came back very quickly, to her credit. And she said when she walked in the room, I looked like a Biafran, which was the flavour of starving African. Yeah, she said you could see my organs, and you could see all my ribs, and you could see all my bones in my arms and legs. She said I was actually on the edge of death. She said.
Oh dear.
So she took me from the childminder and then kept me one night with her brother, and I was then put in the hospital the next day, and I was in hospital for 2 months or more in intensive care until they built me back up again. And then I was adopted by a lovely couple in High Leven near Yarm. And I was always told the story about them going down to York to the Adoption Society and meeting me, and my mum falling in love with me and my dad loving me and bringing me home in the car and everyone being really happy and my mum being really terrified because I was tiny and all that. So I had this story of being adopted from a very young age. And when I was a year and a half old, just a bit older, my sister was adopted. I think she was adopted at 5 weeks. I think I was adopted at just over 5 months. She was adopted at 5 weeks. So we both grew up knowing that we were adopted. And I had lots of adventures in my life. So in about 1998, I found this guy in Reading who did birth record tracing and marriage certificates and things. I gave him 50 quid and I went traveling in India. And after about 5 months in India, I got an email from him saying, we found her. This is her details. And he gave me her address.
Wow.
Yeah, amazing, huh?
It doesn't really work like that anymore, of course, or it shouldn't.
Doesn't it?
No, you have to go through an intermediary now and somebody to hold her hand and hold your hand.
Yes. Okay, so I need to rewind that a little bit. When I was about 22, 23, I actually had a meeting with social services in Stockton and they gave me her proper name. Right. Even though I already had it. It was already in my records. It came with me from the York Adoption Society, but they officially gave me her name. And actually, they told me about the childminder neglecting me and the childminder going to prison for neglect.
No.
Yeah. So the childminder was actually jailed for neglecting me.
Wow.
Because it was quite a serious case. It's had a knock-on effect my whole life. I'm actually shorter than my father and my son. They're both, Ben's heading for 6'5", and my dad was 6'5", and I'm 6'1". So it's actually had an effect on my height. I
Yeah.
believe. And my tummy as well. I've always had a bit of even when I was really skinny, when I've been traveling around India for 6 months, I still had a belly. And I put that down to this sort of protection thing about wanting to like keep a bit of fat there for lean times.
Wow.
I think
Wow.
I mean that could just be like new age flim flam waffle, but it certainly
But I
feels
mean, the
like that.
fact that that's obviously the fact that it was serious enough for social services to call your mother back to get you, and that this childminder ended up in prison is
Yeah,
just deeply shocking. This was not 1965, not 1925.
yeah, not yeah. Well, 1865. It wasn't Dickensian,
Wow.
but it was
Wow.
like that. It felt like that.
So you got her name from the adoption agency when you were in your 20s, and then this guy in Reading found her address for you.
So I met her, and that was all jolly nice for a while, 15 years. It was jolly good. And I met my sisters and my nieces, and it was all lovely, and my nephew, and it was fantastic, and it was all great. But I got details from my mother, but they were wrong. She said that my dad was Al Rogers, and actually his name was Al Fink. So that was kind of weird that she gave me the wrong details, but I couldn't find Al Rogers. And I wrote to Nabisco and said, please find my dad. And they said, we don't have the records going back to 1964. Sorry.
Tell us what your birth mother told you about your birth mother.
Okay, so she told me that he was a manager of Nabisco in the UK, which turned out he was, and they'd had an affair where he'd flown her from various places to where he was in the UK, which is almost unheard of in the early 60s, mid 60s. And I was conceived in the Hilton Hotel in London, in Park Lane.
Wow. Gosh.
Yeah, so that was quite exciting, especially for her.
And did she tell you he was an American?
Yes, I knew that. I already knew that from the judge had told my parents that he was my adopted parents that he was American. So I always knew that. But the judge said, and I think he was basically joking. He said he could be Red Indian, which is what they used to say in those days. So my parents told me that I could be Red Indian. So I grew up thinking I was part Native American.
No.
I was in discussion with my mum about it, and I said, was my father Jewish? Because I always had a very strong affinity with Jewish people. And she went, "Ew, no," in that kind of voice.
She didn't say no, he was a Red Indian. Then.
No, since I did ask her that. I said I'm a Native American. Anyway, so she's very old school, my mother. Anyway, quite a few years later, probably I can't remember when I contacted you. I was searching for my birth father ever since. I really wanted to know who he was.
He told you that he had a horse ranch and that he was
That's right.
engaged to the chairman's daughter.
Yeah, married to the chairman's daughter, the chairman of the Nabisco's daughter, and they had a horse ranch in Arkansas, which turned out to be true. Anyway, so I found you, and you said, "Get me a DNA test." Well, Ancestry DNA don't do DNA tests in Indonesia. They don't supply them to Indonesia, and they don't accept them from Indonesia.
And that's where you now live.
Yes, I've been living in Bali since on and off since 1990. So I was sitting in my house in Bali, wondering how to do it. And I have a friend in Arizona, and I said, "Could you please send me a DNA kit?" And so he did. So this DNA kit arrived in the post, and I filled it in, and I gave it to a friend, and they posted it from England back to America. And I got the results back, and I supplied them to you. And drum roll.
Yes, that was the exciting part, wasn't it? Because
Yeah.
I don't know if I've told you this before, but some cases can take a month, a couple of months. We have some cases that could take years if they're really difficult.
You told me that.
I think I solved your case in an afternoon.
I know. It was like by return of post.
I opened your results, and the first thing I noticed was that you were 50% Jewish, Eastern European Jewish, Ashkenazi Jewish.
Ashkenazi Jewish, yeah.
I'm afraid your mother's "ooh no" was somewhat misplaced because he was indeed
Jewish. I thought that was
Jewish.
hilarious. I'm very proud of my Jewish heritage as well. Because the Jewish people have made a remarkable contribution to the history, to society, and to the world.
And they've recovered very well after the appalling events of 1940s.
Well, and also the events of the 1500s and the 1600s and the 1700s
Yes,
and the 1800s
all
and
the
the
millions of pogroms. Exactly right.
yes. I remember when I was at school, we went on a school trip to York, and we went to Clifford's Tower, and they said
Yes.
this is where the first mass murder of Jews was. Now they got hounded into this place. I was actually very, very shocked at the treatment of the Jewish people. I've had a lot of Jewish friends in my life, and I've always had a really strong affinity. I've had some Jewish girlfriends. It was almost that I knew that I had Jewish blood.
Yes, it made sense. Anyway, so we were looking at your results, and your father was 100% Ashkenazi Jew. Your
Yes,
top DNA match, which would be a blood relative of yours, DNA matches share DNA because they've inherited it from a common ancestor. So these people that you share DNA with in the ancestry database, your blood relatives, your
right.
top match was a first cousin, which was astonishing.
Oh yeah,
The difference really between looking for an American relative and looking for a British or other country relative is that
right,
Americans have embraced testing in a very, very big way. So
right.
in every family, at least a couple of people have tested, whereas in Britain,
Oh
not so
really?
many have. So the fact that you had a first cousin match was
Right,
tremendous. It was
right,
a real gift for you, really. So I
right.
looked at this match whose name was Myrna,
Oh yeah,
and she had a little family tree attached. So I could see all four of her grandparents. So the question I then had was, is she a first cousin to Nick on her mother's side or her father's side? So I looked at the other matches that you had in common with her, and I could see that it was the Fink surname that you shared with her, and so she was your first cousin
right,
on the Fink side. And I then had a look at Max Fink and his wife to see how many children they'd had and where they came from. They came from the Austrian Hungarian Empire in what they was all described as Russia back in the day.
right.
I don't think I know any more than that. They had quite a lot of children. They had, hang on, I'll just count them.
It's a teen,
About
something teen, wasn't
10,
it?
I think. They had
Right,
about ten children, mostly girls.
right,
And one of them was called Al. I found a record for Al, Albert Fink,
right. Yes,
from 1944, where he had been. It was a military record. He had an honourable discharge, and it gave his employer in that record as the National Biscuit Company,
right.
or Nabisco, as we now know it. And I thought, well,
Yes,
this has
as
got
it
to be
became.
him. This guy is called Al, and he works for Nabisco, and he's an uncle of this first cousin DNA match. So we
And
have to
also, I
think
think I remember he was in the U.S. military, so
that
that you
he
probably
must be your father.
yes, excellent. That's amazing, Lou.
Yeah. So I think at that point then, and then I found out that he was buried in Arkansas. So that
Right,
tied in with your idea of him having a horse ranch in Arkansas. He was
right.
actually born in New York, but moved around
Yes.
with his special work at Nabisco. So then think I told you later the same day. I said to you, I found your
Yeah.
father. His name's Albert Fink. He was an American Jewish guy born in New York, and I said to you that he was a married man and that he had two children with his wife, a boy and a girl. I think we had a chat then about, about how you felt about finding out and
That's right.
what you might like to do about it. How did you
Yes.
feel finally getting a name and an answer?
I was thrilled, actually. I was absolutely I couldn't believe that I don't know anything about it, so I didn't know how likely it was you'd find them. But I was very surprised that you found someone so quickly, and I was very excited to learn about them and that I had a brother and sister in America. That was quite amazing.
definitely. And I found a photograph of him in a
That's right.
newspaper article from a long time before you were born, I think, but when he was perhaps in his 30s. And blimey, did he look like you? Did you look like him? Exactly the same hairline for a start. Quite an
Oh
unusual
yeah,
hairline. Exactly the same
is it?
hairline, the same eyes. I thought, blimey, they're like twins, you know?
Because I can't make comparisons. I've got this kind of face blindness. I've got a mild case, but I find it difficult to actually compare faces.
Take it from me, you're the image of your father.
Oh well,
Yeah,
thank you. That's amazing.
absolutely. So how's it been since then? That was a few years ago now. How have things gone?
It's a bit formal, the relationship, for a long time, and I've exchanged emails back and forwards because what you did was you reached out to Al Junior and Carol, my sister, and they both did DNA tests, and you matched them with me. The number of centimorgans was absolutely conclusive, and so we wrote to each other backwards and forwards, and we a little bit formal, and it was kind of like a bit distant. And then sadly, my sister died, which was very sad because I never actually spoke to her. We had a few emails back and forwards, but it was quite awkward, really. I think the interaction. They were very friendly, but it was just a bit too formal. And it turns out that my sister Carol didn't have any children, but my brother Al had two. A son who is a year or two younger than me, which was kind of a bit shocking. You know, I think guess for him it was for my brother and sister.
Yes.
It was a bit shocking that my dad was messing around with someone as old as they were, the same age as they were, basically. So I think that was a bit weird for them. But over the last couple of years, I've actually been more in contact with my brother. Last month, we actually had quite a long chat on WhatsApp. It turns out he's really into model railways, and he sent me loads of videos of himself. He moved his layout to a club, and he was very proudly showing me all his model railway gear, which was quite amusing. And
He should come to Britain. He'd have lots of little railways to enjoy.
well, funny you should say that because he was in Britain when I was conceived around that time. My sister was at Leicester University and he had various jobs in England, but one of the things he had was he was an importer into America of British and European products, and one of them were Hornby Railways. So he was the Hornby
Oh,
Railways guy who took Hornby Railways to America. So he had
wow.
some very successful businesses.
Isn't that exciting? And that's what got him into it, I suppose.
He's absolutely a lovely guy. He lives in Dallas, in Texas now. Yeah, and he's actually threatening to come over in May for a visit.
Wow. That will be something, won't it?
It would be beautiful actually meeting my brother for the first time. I mean, he's going to be an elderly gentleman. I mean, I'm not a young spring chicken, but I think he's 80. I don't know. He's 80 something, 83 or 84,
Or
85 or something.
84, yes.
84 is he? Okay,
Yes.
so it's going to be exciting meeting my brother. And it's, I'm not sure how mobile he is, but he says he can walk. So I'd love to show him around the rice paddies in Bali and my favourite walks. And so I'm quite excited about that.
How do you feel that you feel about yourself and your roots now that you know who both of your biological parents were?
I feel a lot more located in the world, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm more centered in my genetic being. I mean, it sounds a bit pompous, but I actually really do feel that. I sort of know it's kind of grounding. It's a bit like when Ben was born. Before that, I was completely free spirit. I was like totally random in my lifestyle. I just do anything that I wanted to do. And then after I had Ben, I felt connected to history. I suddenly felt like I was part of the world. And finding out who my birth mother and my birth father, my biological parents were, was kind of similar to that in a way.
I do have people sometimes say to me who are not adopted and not illegitimate and who do know who their parents are. They say, I don't know why people feel the need to do this, really. What does it matter? And I say to them, but it does, nonetheless, it does matter to people who don't know.
Exactly. I mean, I always felt like I was kind of, I could have been a fairy princess, or I could have been a a train robber's child or anything. I had no idea growing up who my parents were at all, but apart from this letter saying my mum was a beautician, my dad was American, scant details. So finding out who they really were was very grounding in a lot of ways. It was sort of spiritually nourishing, if that makes sense.
No, it's lovely, I think.
Yeah, it really. I mean, I'm very impressed by your service, and I think it's absolutely essential what you're doing for the people like me who don't know who they are and where they're from. So
Thank you.
yeah, I'm really impressed, Lou. Thank you for all your help. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. The life is like a jigsaw puzzle, and it's fitting bits into place. And finding out who your biological parents are very large pieces of the jigsaw.
I think about those of like me who do know who our parents are, and we could have in general conversation. We might say to somebody else, "Oh yes, my granddad used to play that musical instrument," or
Right,
we had relatives that came from that town, or oh
right.
my nana liked those kinds of flowers. But when you don't know who your family are, you can't really join in with any of those conversations, or
That's right.
have those feelings, or know who you look like, or any of those things, really.
I mean, my parents weren't musical at all. They didn't have a record player. They had a radio and no means of reproducing sounds, recorded sounds at all. But I've been a musician since I was 5. I've always been a musician and a photographer since I was 6 or 7. Like really quite interested in photography. And it turns out on the photography side that my sister did a degree in photography and she's an avid photographer. And my brother's daughter is a professional photographer in California. So I was a semi-professional photographer a while since I've been here. So that's a connection. I don't know about
Yeah,
music.
definitely.
I haven't investigated the music yet. Maybe I should do that. I talked to because my brother told me all these details about this uncle did that and it was kind of overwhelming and this cousin was one of these.
Yes.
They apparently all of the Fink family were incredibly successful. They're all captains of industry and film producers and all sorts of high power kind of things, including my brother, my father, all their family, who all do pretty well in the real world.
I think if you are descended from people who emigrated during a time of difficulty in their country, they will have been the strongest, the brightest, if you like, the most adventurous, the best equipped to go. And having arrived in this case in America, they would have been extremely motivated to be
Yes, you're
successful
right.
and do well and not have to be sent back,
Right.
and to make a place in the world. And it is very, very motivating to work very hard and secure your position.
I don't think people do DNA testing here very much. It's not really the kind of thing that occupies people's time.
Well, it's very much a Western thing.
Yeah.
In America, it's driven partly by the fact that adoption records tend to be sealed for life.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
So if you were adopted in America, chances are nobody's going to tell you anything about who your parents
Oh, that's
were.
fascinating. Wow.
And so DNA circumvents the secrecy.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why it's very popular. Another reason is because despite what the president might think, it's a relatively new country in terms for most of the population anyway, are
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
immigrants. And so they're
Yes.
very interested in discovering
And
whether
some are
they
good people
were
too.
British or Scottish or Eastern European or Western European. Where did their ancestors come from? That's what they'd like to know. So
Right.
they
Yeah.
test, or did they come from the West Indies or did they come from Africa? If you've come to America, or either your grandparents or great grandparents, people would like to know that. They like to know if they're Native American. So they're very, very much more motivated. Whereas in people whose ancestors, as far as they know, were born in an old country like Britain and haven't gone anywhere, and the adoption records are open, there's a bit less impetus, really. Right, lovely. That's excellent. So I'll get on with that. Did you
Thank
enjoy
you.
that?
I did. I very much, and I honestly, what I said about being incredibly grateful, I really am incredibly grateful for the work you've done for me. That's very, very kind of you
You're very welcome. I
to do
just
that.
hope he does come because I think it'll be important for you.
Well, if not, I'll say that if you can't come, fly me to America and I'll come visit you.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Because he's in his 80s. I mean, you don't get that much more time left, do you?
No, definitely not.
No.
I really appreciate it. I think people are going to really enjoy it and find it fascinating. I know they will. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. This has been a Finding Families production with music from Lisa Hoyle. If you have a birth family search that you'd like our help with, please visit our website, which is www.findingfamilies.co.uk. Goodbye.